He says, brother, you're wrong to do what you did. You should never have done. Well, John Peter Gabriel wrote him a letter back. And in the letter he wrote him back, he says, Frederick, he says, do you understand if it weren't for people like me defending your freedoms, you wouldn't have the freedom that you have? It's because of people like me. But in this letter he wrote him back, he went on, he says, now, I'm a clergyman, it's true, I'm a pastor. But I am a member of society as well as the poorest layman, and my liberty is as dear to me as to any man. Kind of like the Apostle Paul, when he was a Roman, when he would be a Roman, but he didn't always live under that. Sometimes I'm a Christian, but I'm a Roman, and I'm two, and the two mix. He says, my liberty is as dear to me as any man. Shall I then sit still? Heaven forbid it. I am convinced it is my duty to do so, and duty I owe to God and my country. Now, today's statement like that would cause a lot of Christians a lot of grief, or a lot of people a lot of grief, because we have a hard time thinking about the fact that we owe duty to God and duty to something else. But it's interesting when you read the Gospels, because Jesus, there was a time when they asked him about taxes. And he said, show me the coin. And they showed him the coin. And he says, render therefore to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Now, interesting the conjunction that Jesus used. Because he didn't say, render to Caesar what's Caesar's, or God what's God. Jesus said, you know what, you have a duty to the land where you live, but you also have a duty to God. And this is what John Peter said. He says, I'm a clergyman, it's true, but my liberty is dear to me, and I owe duty to God and to my country, and that's why I do what I do. Well, John Peter, as he wrote his brother Frederick this letter, Frederick still disgusted, said, you know what, you missed it, brother. You're way off, you never should have done what you did. Well, about a year later, the British actually marched into New York City, which is where Frederick pastored. When they marched into New York City, there were 19 churches. And I mentioned the British did not like pastors or churches. So when they marched into New York City, of those 19 churches, they burned 10 to the ground, and the other 9, they actually desecrated, went and tore things up, broke out the windows. Frederick Augustus, they actually pulled him out of his church, and he had to watch as they desecrated his church. At this point, he said, you know what? Maybe I should get involved. And he did get involved. In fact, he became the first ever Speaker of the House. And he was one of only 2 guys to sign the Bill of Rights. Here's his signature right here, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. One of only 2 guys to sign the Bill of Rights. And by the way, the reason he said he signed it is because the First Amendment guaranteed the free exercise of religion, the free expression of religion, which he said he lost in New York that day when they kicked him out of his church. He said, I'm getting involved to make sure I'm able to keep my religious freedom and liberties. That's the reason this pastor got involved.
Amen.
Well, when you look at our declaration, when you look at what these 56 guys getting together, today we don't think of these guys as being influenced by pastors. We sure don't hear about it. What we hear today is these guys were atheists, they were agnostics, they were deists. What's interesting is when you look at how they did what they did, 29 of these guys held seminary or Bible school degrees. That's more than half. Today we're told they're atheists, agnostics, deists. That's kind of impressive for a group of atheists to hold a Bible school degree. I don't know many. You know, maybe there just wasn't anything else to do at the time. You're an atheist, but there's nothing to do, so you have to go to Bible school. Maybe that's what they did. I wasn't there. No, it's crazy. Over half of these guys held Bible school degrees. In fact, when they wrote the Declaration, they actually say the influence, the inspiration for the Declaration came from this book right here. They based the Declaration on John Locke's work, The 2 Treatises of Government. In fact, this guy right here, Richard Henry Lee, he went as far as to say they actually copied the Declaration from John Locke's work, The 2 Treatises of Government. The reason that's significant, John Locke's work is a little under 400 pages. But in 400 pages, it has more than 1,500 Bible verses on the way government operates. Our Declaration, the founders say, was based on 1,500 Bible verses for how government operates. Well, then I understand why we've been successful. I understand what made us what we were and how we got to what we have. Because when you base it on 1,500 Bible verses, it's going to work. God's way always works, and that's the reason we had the success we had, is because we did it God's way. Well, if you move forward to the Constitution, interesting about the Constitution, when we now get together and we decide we want to have a Constitution, we have delegates from all 13 states that come together. Except the delegates from all 13 states, they all come with their own idea of what we should do to write our own Constitution. And everybody has their own plan. New York comes with their New York plan. Virginia comes with the Virginia plan. New Jersey comes with New Jersey. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. Everybody had their own plan, and everybody thought everybody else's plan was done. No, we're not doing it New York's way. They don't know anything. Virginia. No, we're not Virginia. Massachusetts. And everybody, because they had their own idea, they couldn't agree about anything. And so for the first 4.5 weeks, they could not get anything accomplished. Well, after 4.5 weeks, people begin to leave the Constitutional Convention understanding this is a waste of time. We're not getting anything done. It was at this time, George Washington, in his diary, says it was at this point that Benjamin Franklin, this guy right here, Benjamin Franklin stood up and called the convention. He says, Mr. Speaker, may I say something? We recognize you, Mr. Franklin. What would you like to say? And he stands up, and this is where he has his really famous call to prayer. Really great call to prayer. If you've never seen it or read it, I encourage you to go back and read it. But he calls them to prayer and says, guys, we've never accomplished anything without God's help. Do we think we can do it now without God's help? We need God's help. So he makes a motion that they take time off and they go pray. And if you check the records of Congress, you'll notice they took 3 days off. And for 3 days, they actually went to a church and they prayed and they fasted and they read their Bible for 3 days, seeking God's help for what they were going to do. Now, it's interesting because they went to the church of the Reverend William Rogers. The Reverend William Rogers actually prayed a prayer over them that was printed in the newspaper. And it was actually 3.5 full columns. I just cut out a little excerpt that I think is significant for us to read, where it starts off, O thou eternal I am, to favor them from day to day with thy immediate presence, be thou their wisdom and their strength, enable them to devise such measures as may prove happily instrumental for healing all divisions and promoting the good of the great whole. One of the things he prays is that, God, will you please help heal the divisions, because everybody knew 13 states and nobody gets along. God, help heal the division, and then he prays that you would help do for the good of the whole. God, help them be united so we can do something that's good for everybody. It's really interesting to see, because after 3 days where they go to church, they're praying, they're reading their Bible, they come back and they are able to put together a constitution in 6 weeks that has broken every world record that's ever existed, the most successful document in world history. 4.5 weeks, they couldn't agree on anything. They take time to pray and read their Bible. They come back, and within 6 weeks, God has helped them put together a document, the most successful document in world history for ruling a nation. And it's interesting, too, to see the way their time in Scripture actually influenced what they did. Because you have things like uniform immigration, which is from Leviticus. The way we have treated president natural birth from Deuteronomy. The way we handle our witnesses is also from Deuteronomy. Our idea of attainder, we find in Ezekiel, which, by the way, most people don't know what attainder is today, but attainder is actually forbidden in the Constitution. The reason attainder is forbidden in the Constitution is because it's forbidden in Ezekiel 18. You can also go to things like separation of powers. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams all point to Jeremiah 17:9 and say that's the reason we have separation of powers. 3 branches of government from Isaiah, taxes for churches, Republican form of government. So many things you see very specifically in our Constitution is almost verbatim from the Bible. Now, most people today go, wait a second. I've never seen the Bible in the Constitution. It's either a reflection that we don't know our Constitution very well, or we don't know the Bible very well. Neither one are something we should brag about as Americans. But when you look, you see biblical thoughts and concepts all throughout what we have and what we did, and that's the reason we've had the success we've had today. Well, after we have now written our Constitution, the next thing we have to do is get it ratified in 13 states. Amazing what we do to get it ratified, because we send this Constitution to 13 states to have it ratified. Now, if you're going to send a federal governmental document to have it ratified, you should probably send it to government buildings, right? Well, that's not where they send the Constitution. They sent it to the church. Why would you send the Constitution to churches to be ratified? Well, because that's where most government officials were on a daily basis. And so they sent it there. The government officials met at the churches. And actually, when you even look at the ratification delegates, 44 of the ratification delegates for our Constitution were pastors. It was pastors that were helping this whole thing actually be ratified. Well, after we ratify the Constitution, they have a giant festival, a giant really parade celebration in Philadelphia to celebrate that we've just passed our Constitution. And it's interesting, when you look at this parade, there are actually pastors all throughout this parade. Pastors were celebrating what was going on. And